I'm Nick Biddle. I'm the attorney for CFI, and I'm the person privileged to sit here between these two gentlemen and provide a brief introduction before the conversation. And I fully appreciate none of you are here to listen to me. And so what struck my mind is it's very interesting that you have three English people sat here on the stage in what is quite possibly the least English place in the known universe. We in England, we have Blackpool, we have Skegness, and you have Atlantic City and Las Vegas. And there's an impression that Americans have of the British. And the people you think of tends to be Churchill and the royal family. And then the cast of Downton Abbey and Benny Hill and Are You Being Served? And that's Monty Python. And that's Britain to you. But Britain and England, these are countries with a deep history, both of science and in the arts. It's the country of Sir Isaac Newton, of Charles Darwin, of Faraday. And on the outside, it's the country of Shakespeare, of the Bronte sisters, more modernly of Stanley Kubrick, of the Rolling Stones, of J.K. Rowling. And what we've got here are two of the most foremost people from our country in those two fields, in the field of science and in the field of the arts. On the one hand, we have Richard Dawkins, who, as you know, the premier evolutionary biologist of his time, a science educator second to none, the former Oxford University professor for the public understanding of science, the author of such books that have changed lives as The Selfish Gene, The Blind Watchmaker, and The God Delusion. And then we have Stephen Fry, who described earlier, and I have never heard a person who fits this better, of the Renaissance man. The actor on film, on TV, on stage, the author, the playwright, the radio host, the quiz show host. And if you have not watched QI, start watching QI. The director of Norwich City Football Club. But more than that, this is a man who has educated us, a man who's educated us in humanism and in humanity, who's educated us in history, in LGBT rights and those issues, in mental health concerns, and in the effortless superiority that comes with being English. And this is wonderful, and I am privileged. My mother has said she will never speak to me again because I am sat here between these two gentlemen. So I'm going to pass this over to Dr. Dawkins now.
That phrase, effortless superiority, you know where it really comes from. It comes from Balliol College, Oxford. The effortless superiority that marks the Balliol man. Well, Stephen is not a Balliol man. I happen to be. But I did worry a little bit about the same thing Nick was talking about. This is going to be a terribly English party, and I worry about that. Not only are we both from Oxbridge, but all three of us, I think, but Stephen and I both went to very similar schools as well, in fact, neighbouring schools. I was at Arundel, you were at Uppingham. These are rival schools, and I looked up Uppingham on the web, and it's exactly like Arundel, depressingly so. And you talk about it in your autobiography, and it brought back horrible memories, not that I was there, but very similar memories. But I also got the feeling that you look back on it, even though you were expelled, you look back on it with a certain nostalgia.
I do. And I pick up on a few things that Nick said, and you mentioned also about Englishness. And yes, I am considered by many to be quintessentially English. It's a phrase that's often used. And I find it interesting that two of the 20th century's figures of whom you would most use that phrase are probably Winston Churchill and Agatha Christie, who absolutely typify everything it is to be English. And in both cases, like me, they had foreign parents. They were only half English. Churchill was half American, as you probably know. His mother was an American woman. Agatha Christie's father was an American. My parents, my father's very English, but my mother's family was Middle European Jewish on both sides. And I think sometimes not belonging to a culture, especially one as established and as naturally replete with its iconography of oak trees and Robin Hood and Shakespeare and cricket and castles and royalty and so on. But having a family who are embarrassingly foreign and swooped in from Israel and New York, bearing presents and doing that thing that no Englishman can possibly abide, which is talking about food. And what should we eat? We should eat what you don't eat. I don't talk about eating. It's like talking about going to the lavatory. You can't possibly do that. So I was filled with the embarrassment of the part of me that wanted to be totally English and say, pretend that my foreign family didn't exist. And a great self-consciousness about what it was to be English. And to move that onto our subject, that begins... I was sent away to boarding school when I was 7, so it was like 200 miles from home, which in English terms is the entire length of the country. So my parents seemed to send me away very early to go and stay there. And the day was marked out by religious services, as they are in these schools. And then it was in the public school after that. Again, and I became immensely interested and immensely moved by the music, the architecture, the liturgy, and everything to do with religion, and I wanted to be a priest, an Anglican priest, but high Anglican. I liked it. I liked the music, I liked the smells, I liked the ritual, I liked the feeling of belonging, I loved everything about it. And it got to the stage where I actually went to see the suffragan bishop of Lynn in Norfolk. I didn't quite know what a suffragan bishop is. It's one of those words that's only ever applied to bishop. You never meet a suffragan teacher or a suffragan brain surgeon or something. But anyway, it was a suffragan bishop. And he chatted to me and we talked about theology and so on. And then he asked a question about God. And I said, oh, well, that's my one problem. He said, go on. I said, I've never been spoken to by God or spoken to God or have any real sense that there could be such a thing, because the beauty of the church is it's made by man. The Anglican Church in particular was constructed in a very short time by Archbishop Cranmer and Henry VIII to some extent. And I liked it. I liked what it stood for. I liked its breadth and its sort of tolerance as a church. But the idea of there being a God just struck me as being preposterous. And in my excitement of fondness for the Anglican Church, I had forgotten that really believing in God was still a small, in the case of Anglican, but necessary part. And he advised me to come back when God had spoken to me, and I'm still waiting for that moment. But I'm really, I don't know how you feel about this, Richard. I know you're sometimes accused of not knowing enough about religion, which is nonsense, because I know you do know a lot about the history of Christianity and other religions. And sometimes people have said to me, but you love Bach's masses, you love his the B minor mass, you love the St. Matthew and the St. John, you love so much of his cantatas, you love Mozart's Requiem, whatever, you love Michelangelo and you love, and I say, yes, of course I do, who doesn't? But there are a number of things you can say about that. One is, obviously the church was the great employer in the time of the Renaissance, and so artists had no one else to paint for. But the other thing is that the fact that religious art can be beautiful doesn't make religion true. For example, without slavery, we would never have had what was called the Negro spiritual or gospel music, but I don't think that means you have to believe in slavery. It's just that sometimes, yes, there are certain ways of mankind organizing themselves that artists will produce great art from. And it is one of those peculiar ideas. I mean, after all, most of Renaissance art after sort of 1520s was more likely to be based on Greek mythology. And you don't ask whether or not, Watteau and other artists like that believed in Apollo. It would be nonsensical, wouldn't it?
That's right, yes. Talking of Greek mythology, of course, your latest book, I think, is is Mythos, and yeah. I've just read it, greatly enjoyed it. You don't take moral lessons from that, do you?
No.
It's
very
important.
It's
not like Aesop's fables.
They're not Aesop's fables, no. I absolutely agree. I mean, there's no question that you can look at quite a lot of Greek myth and say that it has tropes, what are known in the business as mythemes, which will be a familiar form of words to you, and which repeat both within Greek mythology and indeed in other mythologies. But particularly in Greek mythology, again and again, you have like the Phaeton myth, you know, who was the son of Apollo stroke Helios, the sun god, who demanded of his father, who'd been an absent father, and felt guilty. He demanded that he be allowed to ride the chariot of the sun. And having granted him any wish, and he couldn't back off, and Phaeton gets on the chariot, and of course he goes too near the sun, and the earth freezes at the poles, and then he plunges too deep, and the deserts get formed as he burns the earth, and then eventually Zeus sees that he's destroying the planet by moving the sun up and down, and he thunderbolts him out of existence. And you probably know the story of Icarus too, of course, the son of Daedalus, the inventor who made the wings, and he told his son Icarus that he mustn't go too near the sea, or the wingtips would be caught and be made sodden and waterlogged, and he'd be drowned, or he mustn't fly too close to the sun because the feathers were held on with wax, which would melt, and he would plummet. And of course, he plummeted. And there are lots of Greek myths along those lines, which exhibit what you might call hubris. People overstretching. Indeed, the Greek for stretching too far is titanes, and the Titans were the race of, the sort of second race of divine beings. The Titans stretched too far. And the Greeks, I think, were aware that they were the first civilization, through all kinds of accidents, including the arrival of the alphabet and originally Linear B and then the Greek alphabet. They were the first nation to believe in progress, to believe that, as it were, a father should outdo a son, a child should outdo a parent. And that's why I think Greek myths are full of things like Phaeton and the young trying to fly too close to the sun. Because the Greeks had, as an example, Egypt. They looked across the Mediterranean, and for 3,500 years, the Egyptians hadn't invented anything new. 3,500 years, an extremely prosperous civilization had basically stayed the same, as had other civilizations, as far as we know, around the world. They had established themselves. This is how we build a pylon. This is how we do a lintel and an entablature. This is how we worship. This is how we move food about. That's it. We now have a viable life, and it can last for 4,000 years. But the Greeks, with incredible speed, changed everything, changed the way they ran their politics into demes or city-states, changed the way they used voting, and changed the way they had juries and a justice system, mathematics and algebra and logic, and even Pythagorean rules about music and harmony. All these things appeared at incredible speed, and the arrival of a literature and it was best put by Browning, I think, who to sum up this Greek, this stretching out, this constant feeling that there is more. You can discover more. It's all there to be discovered. Anagnorisis is the Greek word for that. And they discover from within their own experience as human beings and through experiment with the world. And Browning, as Browning put it, that a man's reach should exceed his grasp, or what's a heaven for? And I think Plato and the Greeks understood the idea of heaven. Although they talked about God and heaven, they knew them exactly as a model, as an idea. There is an ideal to which we strive. And the Greeks are constantly striving towards something better. They don't believe, as Simon Raven, the novelist, put it, the genius of the Greeks lay in this understanding of eschatology, of the idea of a life after death. And it was put by Sinon, I think, the Greek, who said, any single person who tells you that they know what happens to a human being after they have died is either a liar or a fool. It's a simple and obvious thing to say, but the Greeks had that. And it's mysterious to us because we tribally and for hundreds of years, almost 1,500 years, struggled to have such a simple, honest, open idea. Yeah. Anybody who tells you what happens after you die is either a fool or a liar.
I've read you saying somewhere that we must believe there is no life after death.
Oh, yes.
And because we will live a very bad life unless we do believe. Because if we think this This is just a preparation for
Absolutely.
Yes, yeah.
I remember being shocked before he shocked us for other reasons by Mel Gibson. When I know there's all, but he was being interviewed. This is in the 80s, at the very height of his young stardom, when he was the coolest man on the planet, virtually. And I had no idea that he belonged to this particularly severe Catholic sect in Australia that his father was a member of. But the interviewer said, "I believe I've read somewhere, Mel, that you believe in life after death and in God." And Mel Gibson said, "Well, I know one thing for a fact. There's got to be more to it than this." I thought, what? What? Even if you were just an ordinary guy, to say, "Oh yeah, there's America, there's Australia, there's Europe, there's the Lake District, there's the poles, there's the deserts, there's the tropics, there's the bushes,
there's the galaxy, there's the universe."
But there's got to be more than that, surely. But not only that, you are a star who can have as much sex as you can eat and as much money as you could possibly demand, and you feel it's somehow not enough, you know? And this idea that... and of course, as all kinds of obvious ways of knowing that religion, uses the afterlife and the threat of something better as a way of allowing people, or forcing people to put up with what they've got. But yes, I do believe that even on its own terms, if you believe in an afterlife, it limits this life. It's just, you've got to, as Oscar Wilde said, try the fruit of every tree, of every orchard in the world. And some will be bitter and some will be too addictive and so on. But if you... And so I often say to religious people, I said, I would say, well, suppose, a Calvinist appears at the gates of heaven and St. Peter says, "So, what did you make of cannabis sativa, the plant there?" "Oh, I never tried that." "Oh, no." Have you any idea how much effort went into making this very special plant? I'm not saying you should have nothing but you didn't even try it? Well, what about wine? "Oh, no wine touched my lips." You fucker, do you know how complex the grape is? Unique of all fruits, you don't have to add sugar for it to turn into this remarkable drink, and you didn't even bother to try it. That's such an extraordinary idea. I mean, you should, on your deathbed, you should be going, "Damn it, I never drank milk from the armpits of a Nepalese virgin," or whatever it is that, I don't know, that wouldn't be my particular one, but some people... I never climbed Kilimanjaro. I never, there's so much.
That's so beautifully put. Exactly right. I once asked the professor of ancient history at Oxford whether the Greeks really believed in their gods, and to my surprise, he said yes. Do you think they did?
It's very interesting. I mean, there's the gods are so coloured. I mean, the 12 Olympian gods, and there were many others. I think they used the names of primal gods that had no personality, and they did believe in them as abstract words. Aristotle uses them a lot. The Greek words for necessity, cause, and blame, for example. Necessity, enanche, is a very strong idea in Greek philosophy. And moiros, doom, the one's doom literally means, it's not a word you use in English, but it used to be used, portion, what is allotted to you.
Yeah.
And they were the first we know of, again, because they're the first to have writing, but to go in very sophisticated ways into the question of free will, which is a very hot issue at the moment, as you probably know. Very few philosophers now, or scientists, believe there is such a thing as free will, and they kind of don't speak about it because it's a bit embarrassing, because you have to explain to people that that doesn't mean that there's no such thing as responsibility, and it doesn't mean that we don't try and live a good, virtuous life according to our lights and so on, but that it's a sort of intellectual point about it being fairly clear there is no such thing as free will, or as Schopenhauer put it, we can will what we do, but we can't will what we will. And it's a very important point, I think. And the Greeks were very interested in that. And so they had this idea of fate and necessity, your portion, which they gave a kind of divine permanence, that these were things that were there that were outside our control. And I think most of human history And most of myth and religion has been a question of refining our understanding of things we can't control. So when our ancestors were alone and without any building or farming yet as being an idea, we were hunter-gatherers, as the phrase is, their children looked at the mothers and fathers and they said, what is it that pushes leaves out of trees? It's something that's beyond our control. I know if I pick a stone up, the stone is picked up. But what is the power behind a leaf coming out of a tree? Happens every year. What is this fire that comes out of a mountain? What is the water that drops out of the sky? These are things over which we have no control. And so it's very natural that our ancestors gave them personality. It's the first thing we do. It's as much art and literature as it is religion to make a story out of these forces. And so you name a god of the mountain that roars fire, you name a god of the clouds and the thunder, and you have a god of nature and of growth and the harvest and one of decay, and you make rituals out of it. But then slowly you begin to understand them. And each one that you understand, the god disappears.
But this is what animisms do all over the world.
Animism does exactly.
And I get that, but to believe that Zeus turned himself into an eagle in order to...
Oh, I don't think Aristotle or Plato believed those things.
I'm sure they didn't, but
no.
did the ordinary Athenian in the street believe that? And I suspect not, but
I don't think they did. No. I think they conveniently said, much as we, much as children's fairy stories do, that there was a time when men and women walked with pixies and fairies, we say. And there was a time when men and women consorted with gods, the Greeks said, when the gods would come down in the form of an eagle or whatever, or they would turn human beings into flowers. And a lot of these are etiological myths. They're myths to describe the cause of things. And some of them have profound insight, and some of them are just sweet stories. Like, for example, when Zeus and Hera got married, Zeus had said that anyone or anything, any creature that could come up with the best food for the wedding would be granted a wish. And so you imagined this kind of Gordon Ramsay situation, one of these, TV chef things where all these trestle tables and all these different, a young heron had created a little sort of jelly for them to eat, and they try that, and then all the other animals, and they come to this tiny little pot. And Hera tasted it, says, this is delicious. And Zeus tasted it, oh, this is very good. What is it? And the little creature called Melissa, who has made it, says, oh, if you please, I've made this. It's a very special process I've invented. I go from flower to flower and I collect all the little bits of nectar and I then put them together. But it takes a huge amount of effort. But anyway, I've made this pot of it. I call it honey. And Zeus and Hera say, well, you've won the prize. There's no question. Name your wish. And Melissa says, well, it takes so much effort and days and days and days to make the smallest amount of my honey, and one swipe of a fox's paw and one lick of a bear's tongue, and all my work can be undone. And you've given the scorpion a weapon and the snake a venomous bite, but I don't have any weapon. So can you give me a fatal sting so that anyone who tries to steal my honey, it's fatal? And Zeus is furious, and there's a bit sound of thunder because he thinks it's such a selfish wish, and he says, very well. He says, you will have a fatal sting. He squeaks in triumph. He says, but it will be fatal to you. And as you know, a wasp can sting you as many times as it likes, but a bee sting is barbed, a honeybee sting, which is Melissa is honeybee, of course, and so they have to pull their own guts out after they've stung you, and they kill themselves. And that was Zeus's punishment for her selfishness. But pleasingly, as Richard will know, the order to which bees and wasps belong is known as Hymenoptera to entomologists, which means wedding wings. Hymenoptera, which is very... Anyway, so that's just a sweet story. That's a typical mythic story. But then there are, I think, profound insights. So I'm sure you've all heard of the Muses, the 9 sisters who lived and who represent each one of them one of the arts. Terpsichore for dance and Clio for history and so on and so forth. Well, what's so interesting is that their mother... Their father was Zeus, of course, because he was profligate with his seed. But their mother was one of the original Titanesses, one of the first 12 of the Titans, whose name is Mnemosyne. Mnemosyne, it's a difficult word to say. And it's simply the Greek word for memory. as in mnemonic. And so there the Greeks are saying what Joseph Campbell he called myths, he called them public dreams, which I think is rather, Jung called them the collective unconscious. But whatever it is, whether it's the public dream of the Greek people or their collective unconscious, they said the arts are all daughters of memory. And I think that is extremely true. It's a compressed poetic idea that artists reassemble, put back together again, learned experience, felt emotions, truthful recall of what it is to be alive, and that therefore all artists are summoning that memory. Muses are the daughters of memory. And that's an accident, if you like, of the beauty of human culture, that a people can come up with a myth, a way of personifying complex ideas, abstract ideas.
But let me ask about this. I've always been fascinated by where they come from. It's as though we believe that somehow these things emerge from, you talked about Jungian collective unconscious, but somebody must actually have sat down and made it up in the first place. Yes. It doesn't just emerge
it's as the same problem you have with jokes, isn't it? Where did the joke, who first told that joke? And it's
around a campfire or something, somebody made
one assumes around a fire, yes. I have I'm because of one of my great interests is language as well. I think it's very, I think it's clear that around a fire, it's cold, there are animals, wolves are howling, and the children can't get to sleep and full tummies, and you want to tell stories, and everything's mysterious, and as I say, you want to explain things. The Greeks had this advantage that no other myths up until that time, and many after, didn't have, and that is, as I say, they had settled down as a people, as the Doric people, the Ionian people, the various different people of the peninsula of Greece, and so on, and writing had arrived. So Hesiod and Homer were able to put down, and so you could have pedigrees and family histories and chronologies of the gods, which had never happened before. But who first came up with them and their names? Well, you can be sure that they all came from further east. They follow the development of mankind and civilization as we currently understand it, which, as you know, really seemed to spring up in what they call the Fertile Crescent. The Greek for between rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, and the Greek for between rivers is Mesopotamia. So it's that area, that what is now Iraq, the huge irony being the very place where ISIS has pulled down so many of those archaeological reminders of where mankind first started to civilize itself in as much as we ever have, i.e. to settle and have roots and cities and so on. And that's where it began, the first of those gods, as far as we can tell. And they then moved west from Tyre and the Lebanon. The Cadmus myth, which comes from the beginning of the alphabet, comes from there. It was the Phoenicians. It was Cadmus's brother Phoenix who founded the Phoenician Empire. And I mean, we'll never really know because so much that we need to know comes before writing or even carving.
Yes.
But we can guess. And
let's move to the modern world now. You've said, in defense of the royal family, surprisingly, you've said that you're a monarchist of a sort. And one of the points you made was that although the Queen has no power officially, it's somehow good for the Prime Minister to have to go every week and, as it were, explain herself to the monarch. And if only Trump had to go to Uncle Sam.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. I did. I wrote an op-ed for the New York Times, which I said exactly that a couple of 4th of July ago. I said, if Uncle Sam was a living person, this embodiment of the US, and it had only occurred to me when I was writing the article that Uncle Sam, his initials were US. Duh, so obvious. So there with his bony knees and his wispy beard and his stripy top hat and his waistcoat with the stripes and the stars and everything all over it, and he is an embodiment, a personification of what America is supposed to be. Barely a real human being at all, more an idea. And that's what a queen is, that's what a monarch is. Of course, somewhere there's some real DNA, a real person who sits on a lavatory and all the rest of it. But the queen, as far as we're concerned, is an image, an imago, a sort of, a constant embodiment of an idea, not a person. And that's why when people meet the Queen, and actually great friends of this festival and of the great amazing Randy are Penn Jillette and Teller, Penn and Teller, who kind of own this town as magicians and great skeptics and rationalists. And I was emceeing, this is literally 20 years ago now, because I'm doing the same thing in 3 days' time for his 70th birthday, but it was the 50th birthday of the Prince of Wales, and I was emceeing the show we did at the London Palladium, and Penn and Teller did some magic at it. And after the curtain came down, Penn, who was next to me, said, no, what happens now? We've got to meet the Prince, is that right? And I said, yeah, he just comes along the stage and says hello to everybody. And Penn said, have I got to call him Your Majesty? I said, well, no, he's not the monarch. Technically, it would be Your Royal Highness if you wanted to call him anything, but don't bother. I haven't called you Penn once since we've been chatting in the last. You don't call people by their name. Do you, Nick? Do you, Richard? So just don't bother. Don't think about it. And do I have to bow? Because I'm American. We don't bow. I said, of course, he knows you're American. He's heard your voice. He may not know that Teller's American because Teller doesn't speak, but he knows you're American. Honestly, it's fine. Well, as long as you're not going to get put in the Tower of London. Oh, for heaven's sake. I assure you, it's fine. Anyway, Prince of Wales, lovely to see you. How did you do? Thank you for coming. Do appreciate it. Very nice indeed.
That's a perfect invitation, by the way.
And then he gets to Penn, who falls, Your Royal Majesty, Highness, sir. Sir, Highness. And he's absolutely, prostrate on the ground. And the prince looks a little baffled, but he's used to it. It happens all the time. He moves along, and then, of course, Penn turns to me and said, I betrayed my country. What power do they have? And it is that power that exists, and it's not the same as a pretend religious thing. It's something we understand. In minor ways, we know what the power of a brand is in the corporate world. And in a much more concentrated and extraordinary and almost mystical way, the power of a brand like a monarch is such that I have seen people who are furiously anti-monarchistic, who in the presence of the Queen will melt slightly. And if President Trump were not the head of state, but were the servant of his people, like a prime minister, who has a head of state, who would be Uncle Sam, and if, like the prime minister, has to every single week, come what may, the Prime Minister has to go to Buckingham Palace and have an audience with the Queen. And you'll probably remember, if you ever saw the series The Crown, when the Queen first ascended to the throne, her first Prime Minister happened to be Winston Churchill, who had to come in to her presence and stand, an old man, not that physically well, stand in her presence and explain himself to this young girl who was the symbol of her country. And she took the mantle on and has been doing it ever since. Now, if Trump had to do that, had to go to some colonial mansion on the hill where this figure, or Uncle Sam, was, well now, young Mr. Trump, what have you been doing this week? And Trump had to bow his head. And he's bowing his head not because he believes in monarchy or some trumped-up nonsense to do with the divinity of kings, but because he is abasing himself in front of the idea of the country he is there to serve. I think that's immensely helpful. And that's where I think myth, ritual, and ceremony have real place, as long as you know what they are. Because if you actually believe there's a God, or as long as you understand that at the most it's the Wizard of Oz operating the levers, then nonetheless the power it has over us is that we are, as evolutionary biology and so on, which is, as you know, a hugely growing field, we're beginning to understand a little more about how we evolved in terms of our feelings as well as our cognition. I'm sure many of you have read some of the popular books that have been around in the last dozen years dealing with the subject of the contingency of our understanding of anything. at exactly the time when the world is disintegrating and the power of the UN or the EU or other groups, however flawed, to bring people together, everyone's being propelled against. And even today, I noticed Trump has got rid of the 1986 or 87, is it, strategic arms treaty with Russia. He just announced today he's terminating it, he said. So as all of this happens, and as less and less authority and understanding of in the world happens, we are beginning to understand how little we actually know. So that while skeptics and rationalists are very keen to remind people of how we should always examine the truth and look at the truth, we are the first to understand, thanks to Daniel Kahneman and thanks to various others, how little we know, and how much our cognition and how much our understanding is colored and changed, is transmogrified by both what we wish and what we have experienced, what our body expects us to feel or our eyes expect us to see. And we can't necessarily trust in everything. But that's an excitement. That doesn't mean we give up trying to know things. It means we try even harder to realize how, just how our emotions have a huge part to play in everything we do. We are immensely emotional. And being skeptical and being rational is not denying that. It's understanding it. It's understanding the part emotions have to play. And ritual and ceremony and metaphor and symbol, which are the substance of art and so on, are also the substance of a lot of ways humans behave. I mean, even the comedy of me not knowing who was to take the award that I was given, I almost wanted to say, well, the one thing the church gets right is they rehearse. the bishop has told the altar. Well, we don't know what he's told the altar boy. There is a way you hold it here, you put it down here, this goes here, and I'm sure many humanists in the room have come across this issue of where we find the poetry and the romance, the ritual, the glamour that the church has over hundreds of years has managed to find in order to send people away from the world. And I've yet to come to a really good humanist funeral or wedding. And some of them, I was asked by a friend, a concert pianist, to be the humanist preacher, as it were, at his wedding, and I did my best. And one can raid and ransack the larder of poetry and music that exists without having to adduce a creator for someone's wedding or someone's funeral. But we should learn from the fact that the church is damn good.
Obviously, I was not present at that wedding, Stephen, but I absolutely know you did it a lot better than any vicar or suffragan bishop.
Oh, you're sweet. Thank you.
Because, and I think I disagree with you about funerals too. I've been to a number of humanist funerals and a number of religious
And they've
funerals.
worked well, have they?
No question about it.
Oh, that's
the religious ones are not tailored to the individual. They are a formula, an algorithm, which is in the Book of Common Prayer, and they just read out as though it was anybody. The humanist ones are about the person who's died.
Yes.
The person who's died, their favorite poetry, their favorite music. You got eulogies speaking about them. There's so much more
It's true.
moving.
You're absolutely right. And tailoring it and being personal rather than, as you say, being general. But on the other hand, it's a good mixture, because if you are married in a traditional service and you get a really dramatic vicar or bishop, and they say after the bride and groom have kissed, "Those whom God hath joined, let no man put asunder."
Yes.
You think, "Wow, that's good. That is good." You really, or similarly, ashes to ashes, dust to dust.
Yes.
You think, wow, I am joining in with my community in that happening
Yes,
to me.
that's true.
But there are a few good phrases that we've got to admit that they came up
I
with
agree.
some goodies.
But we can match them.
Yeah.
Shakespeare or we can do it.
But it's a bit cultural, I just suddenly remembered I was doing a film in northern Spain, and they have this amazing tradition, the Basque, the choco, where the men cook, and they have these male cooking clubs, and all the wives and families and friends come, and the men do this feeding outside often, or if it's in winter, inside. And we were invited to this, and it was astonishing to see, and a great thing to be a part of. And when it finished, people got up and started singing Basque songs, and there were about 7 of us. who were English in the film. David Suchet, who played Poirot so successfully, he was playing Napoleon, I was playing Wellington. And there were a few of us, and they turned to us and said, "So, sing now." And we suddenly thought, what am I going to sing? Am I going to sing "We All Live in a Yellow Submarine" or something? They've been singing these Basque songs of the mountains that are 300 years old. And I said, I don't know any English songs, apart from pop songs. I mean, there is sort of "Early One Morning, Just as the Sun Was Rising," or there are few. And maybe that's the problem. Maybe the problem with being English and empire and everything like that is that we have no culture of our own. We've just stolen so many.
We have the world's worst national anthem.
Yeah, we do have a pretty grim one of those, don't we?
Yeah. You've said, Stephen, that the catastrophe of Trump and Brexit is less a triumph of the right as a failure of the left.
Yes.
Do you recognise the phrase regressive left, which I think was coined by Majid Nawaz?
Yes, I've come across it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you have a view on that?
I am. There's a part of me that just wants to be mischievous and say, look, this Grand Canyon, close to where we are now, this Grand Canyon's opened up in America and really across the world, and certainly the developed world, the chattering world, if you like. And it's getting wider every day, and therefore people on each side of the divide, they have to shout louder and gesticulate more horribly to be heard by the other side, and they're not being heard by the other side, and they're just making noises and screaming and hating each other deeply and thinking the other vile and destructive and inhuman. And I like to think of myself and right-thinking people as cowering in the ravine at the bottom, unsure what to do, because on the one hand you have a nativist alt-right bringing up all kinds of nasty and unacceptable and horrifying racist thoughts and divisions, but also you have a preposterous illiberal liberal left shouting out these jargonistic nonsense from the universities. If I have to hear about the patriarchy and cisgendered white privilege, again, my heart has always been with the left, and that makes it all the more difficult for me to think that I just cannot. And this is at the heart of, I think, when we talk about being English, we talk about Shakespeare and J.K. Rowling and Isaac Newton and everything. The one thing they all have in common is empiricism. It's not about knowing anything. It's not about having a point of view which is your strict view of things. It's about finding out, experimenting and trying things out and seeing what works. And I think the left has a terrible problem in rhetoric and expresses itself in a way that is precisely, it seems, designed to alienate even soft right people, even ordinary Republicans who are maddened by what they see as the nonsense of political correctness. Most left people are not, prey to it, but unfortunately the mouthpieces on either side are so loud, and you're supposed to take a stand. I'm supposed to be on one side or the other. Well, I just repudiate that. I won't be on either side. Neither means anything to me. And so we have to... I was thinking a lot about my friend Christopher Hitchens, whose spirit is at occasions like this, of course, was much stronger than I was. And his great hero as a political writer and thinker was George Orwell, who was much stronger and more forceful about these things than, as Christopher was more strong and more forceful about these things than I am. My hero really was probably E.M. Forster, who's better known as a novelist, but as an essayist, he had a lot to say. His attitude is probably best summed up by one of his essays, which is called Two Cheers for Democracy. He said, I can't quite bring myself to sound three cheers, he said, but two cheers is about right. And he and his friend Bertrand Russell, made the point about how we live in the world that those who are stupid are so full of certainty, and those who are wise are so unsure. W.B. Yeats put it most famously in the ceremony of innocence is drowned, and the best lack all conviction, and the worst are full of passionate intensity.
And the centre will not hold.
The centre will not hold, exactly. And that's the problem. Being in the centre, which will not hold, the best, which you hope you're part of the best, lack all conviction. We're not certain. We're not convinced. We're not sure how the world should go forward. we recognize ugliness when we see it, and gracelessness and unkindness and brute force and clamoring, kind of binary tearing away of everything, so that, you know, this constant you're either with us or against us attitude. And stuck here in the middle, people say, oh, well, you know, that's all very well, but that's you just being a liberal, you know, squashy, soft, you know, there are people dying out there, they'll say, you know, and yes, there are, and one does, you know, look at the Rohingyas being massacred in, and disrupted and destroyed in Burma, and look at, you know, look at what's going on in all over the Yemen and in Syria and places like that. There's all kinds of terrible things happening, but I don't hear the regressive left or the illiberal liberals, as I call them, or the right making any fuss about that. And I'm desperate to know what to think. I really am unsure, because part of me says, yes, of course, all my life I fought for gay rights. I fought for, you know, I not fought, listen, no, don't romanticize yourself, Stephen. I haven't fought at all. I've sat at a desk and tapped at a keyboard and occasionally done the odd interview on the subject of gay rights. So I haven't fought at all. But I have at least expressed an opinion, and you know, my heart is with, you know, with people being given a fair shake of the sauce bottle, as Australians put it, you know, and a fair shake it seems to be good. But we now aren't allowed really much room for conversations of any nuance or any doubt. You have to be on one side or the other. And the world, I'm convinced of it, America, certainly Britain and Europe, are crying out for something in between. And unfortunately, what we've had in between in the past, and it's too recent to be forgotten, in America is Bill Clinton, and in Britain was Tony Blair. Both of whom very impressive people in terms of their grasp of history and of the mechanics and process of power and all the rest of it, but who are slightly kind of, I don't know, disreputable in our eyes. In case of Britain, in the case of Blair, because he took us into an Iraq war, which most of us think was a mistake. In the case of Clinton, all kinds of reasons to do with his own behavior as well. And so that third way that they represented, a very self-conscious third way, is treated with suspicion. And my feeling is that a true satirist and someone with true insight, a Jonathan Swift, would actually be saying to you all, and I should be saying to myself, don't look to blame politicians, don't look to blame the sloganeers on either side of the culture wars. It's not their fault, it's your fault. We are the ones who say, oh, look at politicians, they're always just disagreeing with each other, and then the moment there's a third way politician, you say, well, they're all the same. Well, you can't have it both ways. Do you want them all the same, or do you want them all different? It's actually you are the problem. You and I are the problem. We want to drive around in cars, and we want a green, clean world. Well, you can't have both. You can't square that circle. There are lots and lots of circles that can't be squared and squares that can't be circled. But we lay off all our guilt, all our own self-disgust at our greed and our rapacity as creatures on this earth. We lay off that burden on politicians whom we pay to take our disgust and filth that should be aimed at us.
And before we finish up and move over to the book signing, there was one question I wanted just to address to both of you on this. And yesterday, unfortunately, you were stuck somewhere on Delta when we heard Steven Pinker speak, and very optimistic that we are, you know, the world is getting wealthier, poverty is going down, malnutrition is going down, the economy is moving forward. Yet on the other hand, we see not just the political catastrophes that are happening, but also the potential environmental disasters that the UN is talking of unfolding. Are you both short-term and long-term, are you optimistic? Are you pessimistic? Where are we going as a world?
Well, Steven Pinker and Matt Ridley, both my friends, are sort of the two optimists in the world at the moment. And they both make a persuasive case that science can do all sorts of things, and we may be in trouble in all sorts of ways, but Science will find a way, and if you look at the broad sweep of history, things are getting better. I desperately want to believe them. I would like to try to put the optimistic case, say, we are in a temporary reversal at the moment. Things are not going well at the moment. Things are going extremely badly at the moment, both in Britain and America. But if you do take the long view of history, I think it's possible to be optimistic. So, unrealistic as it sounds, I'm going to sort of slightly side with Pinker and Ridley.
Yeah, that's very good. I agree with you, Richard. And I think a lot of human progress has been 3 steps forward, 2 back, or 2 steps forward, 1 back, or whatever. But it has been forward. But this may be a step back moment where things are bad. But I think there's a lot to think about. I do some work occasionally for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who are particularly strong on the SDGs, as they're called, the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, this is one of these dull bureaucratic phrases that it began with the Millennial Goals in the year 2000, where all the countries of the United Nations signed up to certain aims, and these were refined in the year 2010 into these sustainable goals, 27 of them, a lot to do with female education, for example, and things that people know will transform the way that the poorest and the most disease-ridden in the world, those with the fewest opportunities in the world, that can most be taken out of poverty. And the results there have been astounding. I mean, truly amazing. In that period, 2000 to now, which many people think of as the post-9/11 period, the period of fear of terrorism and so on, which of course it has been. But in that period, 66% greater increase in women having education around the world. 66%, 2/3. I mean, that's pretty astonishing. And the results against HIV and even the more resistive strains of TB and other diseases, these are being controlled in ways that would have seemed impossible 15 years ago. And so in that respect, things are going very well. But I would agree the threat to the climate and to the world that's being offered is a desperate one. And also, as I said at the lunch today, all this is ignoring the technological transformations that are coming in the next 20 or 30 years with AI and biotech and bioaugmentation and gene editing and stem cell work. And I mean, there's so much of it. Each one of these technologies on its own would be transformative, but together they represent what I call a tsunami that is approaching us. And a lot of that will be helpful to health, extraordinarily helpful to health. It will create great economies of scale. The data, which become the new currency rather than petrol or the dollar, data is the currency, will allow all kinds of medical advances, I'm convinced. And I hope a more rational view of genetic modification of crops will allow for the immense promise they offer. People are very superstitious about them, as if they're somehow monstrous, as if they're new even. But so I think there are all kinds of scientific possibilities that will help. But we just have to be alert. And this is what, skepticism really means: alertness, being alive to an idea, seeing an idea as a living thing. And in honor of my rival university, Oxford, from which you both come, and as a Cambridge man, but as a great admirer of Oscar Wilde, I will end just by quoting it. And I think this is what conventions like this do and should foster. When Oscar wrote his letter to his old lover, Bosie, from prison, it's called De Profundis, from the depths, and he accuses him of a lot of betrayals and things, but he's also very complimentary to him. But he says, when you were at Oxford, you didn't get a degree. That's perfectly understandable. Many fine brains have never managed to get their degree. But what I find inexcusable is that you never acquired what used to be called the Oxford manner. He said, I know that sounds a terrible phrase, but I take it to mean this: the ability to play gracefully with ideas. Isn't that a wonderful thing? The ability to play gracefully with ideas. And I think it's very important that the skeptical, rationalist, secularist, atheist movement remembers to be graceful, remembers that playing with these ideas is what enlivens us individually and fulfills us as humans, as well as fulfilling, I hope, much more of the public culture, that the understanding that ideas are to be embraced and hugged and played with and licked and enjoyed and have the juice sucked out of them, and that there's pleasure in this. It's not an earnest endeavour. It's not a grim piece of work. It's an excitement. And I think that will ensure the better future, being alert and playing gracefully with ideas. Thank you very much. Thank you, Nate. Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring that bell to be notified about new videos. You can follow us on social media, and if you really love what we do, consider supporting us with a donation. Links to all that good stuff is in the description below.